So since we're thinking about how English departments are positioned and how a dialogue of multiple perspectives and voices can help English studies revision and re-see itself, I thought it would be important to apply that lens to a few English departments. So I thought we would start with looking at Gardner-Webb's English department. And so while we are looking at these pages, I want you to stop the video at any point when you want to scroll a little bit longer or open up a new tab and screen and look a little more carefully. So anytime I'm going too fast, just pause the video and do whatever you need to do to kind of look a little longer at apply an idea a little bit longer. So now that we start to, one of the things with graduate programs and your graduate studies is you're kind of putting on a new set of glasses. So in your undergraduate programs, you were really trying to get the lay of the land in your content area and specialty areas. And in graduate programs, you're really trying to come on the other side and be the one who is able to talk about the lay of the land. And so in order to do that, you're going to need to be able to apply a theory or a concept or a lens and view text or ideas or concepts through that lens. And so while we're talking, keep the reading this week in mind and see how you can apply and connect to these ideas from the reading and what we're looking at. So looking at Gardner-Webb's department page in the undergraduate catalog, it's important just to see how it's worded, how we title ourselves, and that was discussed in the reading. Department of English Language and Literature. So English language and literature has certain implications, and it's a positioning. Then you can read through some of the mission statements and our goals and our student learning outcomes. This is a good example of where I'm not going to stay here a long time, so you could pause and look at these yourselves. But what you want to notice, apply your lens from the reading, is what is being valued through these learning outcomes. That's what we communicate when we create a goal or an objective or a learning outcome. What is valued? Major fields of study, the language that is used, English with teacher licensure. And then we have more specific degrees of study and concentrations under English, such as pre-professional, a very vague and interesting term, writing, specifically general writing, professional writing, and creative writing. And then I'm going to click here and let you look at some of our courses. First, what are we smacked with immediately? Literature. So if you know nothing about our department, what does it seem like is the emphasis and focus and foundation of our department? Hopefully you're answering literature in your head right now. Clearly, look at all these courses and look at how that's what we present first, the categories of our literature courses. But then once you start to read further, you see we obviously have other types of courses that are not literature based, but the forefront is clearly literature. What does that mean for someone like me who's an English education professor, for instance, and doesn't necessarily teach the literature courses? How do I define and position myself? What are the things you think I have to do? Same thing with Dr. Duffus, who is a literature professor, but also does other things. And she's a world literature professor, and that's a whole nother layer within literary studies. And then there's Dr. Buckner, who comes from a new media rhetoric and composition and writing studies background. Where does she fit in these courses? So I'm scrolling through this quickly, so of course this might be a place where you want to pause and open up your own page and look through these more carefully. What I'm going to do now is move to a different department, a different program, which was Marcia McDonald's, Dr. McDonald's, from Belmont University, and her department is called Department of English. And then I wanted to see what are some of those courses that she talked about towards the end of her chapter. They were very interesting and unique courses, and as I was scrolling through, I found this one. First of all, the opening letters are very different than the other letters in the course catalog. ENL is meaning English, typically literature with the L is a distinction. And then ENW for them is English with writing as an emphasis. But here's a HUM, which we have to assume means humanities, but it's listed under the English department course description. And so if you read through this course description, it's very unique. It's very mixed in terms of its discipline and interdisciplinary. And so I found that to be interesting and to go along with a lot of the things she talked about. One of the courses that she talked about was the writing in the community, specifically Nashville. And she had this whole idea of decentering the classroom that she presented. And so I wanted to see what that course and course description looked like, and here it is. Finally, I thought it would be interesting to go back to a historically foundational element to English and English departments, and that's Harvard, considered the first English department in the United States. And they are called Department of English, and we can add the, probably is often how it's used, the Department of English. And just notice the difference between that and back to Gardner-Webb. Sorry, making you drunk a little bit now. Department of English Language and Literature versus Department of English. Now, what's interesting about Harvard is they have concentrations. That's what they call, I guess, what we would consider your major. And what it seems like, based on a very superficial glance at their website, is they encourage multiple concentrations and very interdisciplinary programs, almost discussing how you can specialize and create your own degree, essentially, and course of study, which is very interesting. And so when I started looking through their courses, we have categories like creative writing, common ground courses, which you can click on some of these drop down buttons and get some additional information there. Lectures with sections, graduate seminars, general education, and then cross-listed in other departments. So it's very unique, it's different, and it's a different language. And so what is Harvard trying to do? How are they positioning themselves as the Department of English on campus in order to have a stake and a foothold in the rest of what we can assume is the university curriculum? So that's just a little bit of information and a little way that you can start to apply these ideas from this week's reading to very practical examples like an actual English department page. I encourage you to look at your undergraduate or other schools that you know of, their English departments, their communications departments. I know a lot of you have different backgrounds, so you might go back and just see what are these words and how are they choosing to present themselves through those words, and then how might that be helping them or hindering them in positioning for the larger organization of the university and the university curriculum. I hope that helps you and gives you a little practical way to think about our reading this week.